I'd like to welcome to our Logisticsexplained.com podcast, Ian Cramb from X2 talking about the 4PL sector. So thank you so much for joining us, Ian.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. What brought you into the logistics sector?
Well, by mistake, like a lot of people. I left school at 16, went to college, didn't really like that, started worked for a couple of years. I was brought up in Newcastle upon Tyne, and worked for a couple of years. Had my first introduction to transport at a scrap metal plant where we had a skip wagon fleet, 6 vehicles, and I was loosely involved in that. Then I worked in the building trade, got made redundant twice, and decided that I really need to go back and get some qualifications. Went back to college part-time, funded myself through window cleaning and motorcycle braking up in the northeast. Got some good A-levels and got into Sheffield University to read geology, which I really had a great time for 3 years. I was going to go into the oil industry, but when I came out, there were no jobs. The Iran-Iraq war was on. Oil had dropped down to $8 a barrel. And no exploration work was happening. So I had to rethink and spoke to somebody who says, well, you did a bit of transport. Why don't you look at the graduate training scheme, which is what I did. And after a few conversations, ended up joining the National Freight Consortium, as was about 50 odd different operating companies, BRS, national carriers, various other people. And at that time, their 9-month graduate training program was second only to M&S in terms of reputation, and it was brilliant. So I did 9 months really hands-on stuff, about 9 or 10 weeks of classroom type of environments, and came out and got offered a job running of my own little depot down in Croydon in South London, doing home delivery of furniture, part of the Harris Queensway group. So that's how I got into it, and I sort of moved around a variety of big logistics companies for many years. So I was in Carifast, which became UPS. I went to Salversons for several years, Wincanton, and got experience in everything from newspapers to fuel distribution to retail, non-food, food, hospitality, primary distribution, secondary distribution, home delivery on behalf of people like Wix. So really sort of got a mainly transport, but did have quite a lot of warehousing responsibilities later in life. So finally ended up 2007. I'd been with DHL for about 7 years. Obviously that was not National Freight, that then became XL, then became DHL.
Yep.
Looking after about £80 million of the business as a business director, everything from Debenhams to TK Maxx to O2, Carphone Warehouse, range of different customers and different disciplines. And to be honest, realised at last that for all sorts of reasons, I really wanted to work for myself. So I started to look around, had a great mentor who had gone through the management buyout of a pallet network, who we'd stayed very close friends with and still are, and had a look at a few businesses, and finally came across X2.
Fantastic. And when you did that, was it a 4PL then, or it developed into a 4PL?
No, it was a 4PL. The origins of the business, actually, it was X2 was put together back in 2003 by 4 Palletways members who personally got on really, really well. And they realised that they were seeing exponential growth in their own businesses, their own haulage businesses, really down to the fact that they were collaborating with lots of other people around the country to move less than full load work around. So 1 to 6 pallets was their speciality. Now those networks have developed to sort of, quarter of a pallet, literally down to up to 6, 7, 8, 10 pallets. And thought, well, actually, general haulage and full load movements are really difficult to make money out of. Lots of empty running, lots of inefficiency. Why don't we recreate what we've done in the pallet networks on a full load basis by collaborating with lots of different hauliers around the country, initially Palletways members, and they launched X2 in 2003 and grew the business over several years. But because it was multi-shareholder, nobody singly was driving that growth for the future. So they started to look at maybe doing something else with it, and I got introduced to them. And after about 6 months of discussions and negotiations, while still doing my proper job, as it were, I remortgaged my house and bought into the business. So a management buy-in rather than a management buyout. And I acquired 70% of the business in 2007, resigned from my then employer DHL, started in 2008, and have been with the business ever since.
Well done and fantastic. I sort of went into the sector. So can you tell me about, an overview of the 4PL sector and its position in the supply chain cycle, please?
Sure. It depends on who you talk to. The strict original Accenture definition of 4PL is where an organization has no assets to speak of apart from their people and a computer system, and they coordinate the assets of others to provide a service. Now, some would say that 4PL should be end-to-end global supply chain, from literally origins in Yantian in China, consolidation in country, shipping, import, destuffing containers, delivering product to DC, overseeing the order picking and shipping out to direct to consumer or to store. But you can then break that down into various segments. And the segment that we specialize in is transport. It's UK and it's road transport. We do a bit of European, but those areas are where we specialize in as our version of 4PL, if you like. Others would say, DHL talks about their 4PL offering, and it is literally the entire supply chain. Our specialism and the service we provide our clients is road transport, but we can be anywhere within that. So we could be picking up containers from a port. We could be collecting from suppliers on the continent and bringing back to their DCs. We could be then moving those from an NDC to an RDC and direct to store. We work for a lot of retailers, both in food and non-food. We could be working for manufacturers who make raw materials. So one of our biggest clients makes processed edible oils, which then goes into the supply chain, everybody from pub groups to food manufacturers to supermarkets. And then we can do the reverse parts of those, as well as the recycling elements. So whether it's cardboard, packaging, those sorts of things. And similarly, work for manufacturers in packaging, supplying those primary manufacturers or retailers with the products that they need to then send on the next stage of their journey. So
it's a very diverse and interesting sector. And why would a company normally use a 4PL? Would that be on top of an existing supplier or separate from, or mixture of both?
Yeah, a mixture of both, really. So some of our customers that we now provide what we call our one-stop shop. So we are the only supplier. One of them in particular, prior to us becoming involved, they had 52 different hauliers that they were managing, and they were struggling, as you can imagine, as a manufacturer to do that in-house. 52 invoices, 52 different people to talk about return of PODs, booking into the warehouse, so on and so forth. And to be honest, their on-time performance and their customer satisfaction levels were not great. And we moved in, and literally we are now that one-stop shop. Of course, we have a range of our own haulier partners who do the work, not quite as many as 52. We've done some rationalisation, but they have one single point of contact for all their transport, and their OTIF has gone up 22%, I think, since before we took over and now running that business. And that actually we had a 3-year contract with these guys, and we've just renewed it for another 3 years. So that's a sort of a complete element. Other parts, we will do little bits for people. So if a customer has a core fleet, or they have a particular difficulty because they have no return loads coming out of the southeast of England or out of Scotland, then we will look at providing those services on a one-way basis, which fits in exactly with what they want. And clearly we as a business want to grow, so we're looking for all year round work, but we do a lot of seasonal work helping people out. And that, because of our structure and our capabilities with our haulier partners, we can provide that managed service with pretty significant increases in volume. So I'll give you an example for a parcel operator. The busiest year we ever had with them, we provide 150 vehicles with drivers a day, 7 days a week for a 6-day period. Never missed a delivery throughout that period of time. So, and we sometimes call this the dimmer switch. So we started with nothing before that peak. We then built up very quickly to that 150 loads a week and then turned it off as soon as the season had finished. So that scalability is remarkable, because otherwise that customer would have had to try and find agency drivers, vehicles, probably would have had those on hire for 6 months, because the hire companies will want that revenue period not just for 6 weeks, they want it for a much longer period to secure the resources. And similarly, guarantees for agencies to supply that level of resource. But because we have so many different haulier partners, we can spread that demand through a range of people, but still provide that one-stop shop.
That's very interesting. And also probably, as you mentioned, times of peak, or if you've got, times when there was a driver shortage, your sort of reach and access to the market reasonably seamlessly must be great for clients.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Gosh, that's very interesting. So describe the current challenges in your marketplace for your business, please.
Okay, well, they're many and varied, and they don't just apply to our marketplace, but I think really to the whole economy. So lots of challenges for sustainability for everybody, but particularly in the transport industry, surrounding things like inefficiencies, empty running. The 4PL model by its very nature is incredibly beneficial on that basis, because so many things are one way and infill. So we're utilizing existing assets and we're filling in empty legs with paid cargo, which benefits the suppliers and the customer, and is also friendly from a green perspective. Other challenges, I would say, is all around the skills shortage in our industry, and just the labour shortages across the country, post-pandemic in particular. And that's part of the reason why we as a business got involved with Generation Logistics, which is a collaboration between the CILT, the government and Logistics UK, to try and promote careers to younger people in our logistics industry, which can be many and varied in terms of the sort of career prospects, everything from vehicle engineers to robotics people to AI to systems to finance to warehousing to transport to international freight, sea freight, air freight, a whole range of things people get interested and involved in. It's a much more exciting and sexy industry than a lot of people realise. So I think they're doing a great job in that. But there are challenges. Driver shortage has been talked about a lot, but the challenges that we've seen in terms of post Ukraine war, and to a certain extent the Israel-Gaza conflict, is a reduction in volume and activities, disruption to movements of product through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal because of Houthi rebels, who's not only delaying things but actually is cancelling orders. So there's a lot less volume moving around the country, and what was quite a driver shortage back in the bounce back from the pandemic is now not so critical, because the volume is not there to move, the demand is not there. But still 12,000, the numbers say 12,000 HGV drivers are retiring every year, and only 6,000 are taking their test. So the problem is going to become worse and worse and worse. And it's right across Europe. Before we survived, when we had free movement to people, clearly a lot of Romanians and Bulgarian drivers came to the country, Polish drivers before them, and that satisfied some of the gap that we had ourselves, but that you don't have now. So it's a problem that will arise from our perspective. It's a challenge and also a massive opportunity, because I have multiple hauliers in every single postcode of the country, in every town, in every city, in every area, right across the country. So if one guy's got a bit of a shortage of drivers, I can talk to somebody else in the same postcode and get the service offering for my customer. So we actually did very well as a business coming out of the pandemic, because so many people couldn't get drivers when the driver shortage was on the news at 10 and so on and so forth. We were thriving and getting customers out of difficulties because we had so many different options. And the same will happen again. I suppose I should declare that we also, although we're a 4PL for most of our business, we also do run a trucks, 44-ton Arctics, working for one dedicated client, days and nights in the automotive sector. So I have to make sure I can also supply drivers from our own business as well. So it is a challenge for us as well as an opportunity. So I think those are the areas. And I suppose the biggest challenge that certainly all logistics businesses are seeing now and have done for the last year since the Ukraine war, there's been massive cost increases in fuel, in labour, in insurances, vehicle pricing, trailer costs, so on and so forth. Everything has gone up, not down. And we're talking 10 to 15% increases over the last year, 18 months. And those costs are not going away. You then couple that with interest costs going from 0 basically to 5, 6, 7, 8%. This is why you're seeing so many insolvencies in our industry. A lot of people going out of business because they made decisions based on a certain cost profile. Customers don't feel they're able to fund the additional increases. People are stretching. The other thing is cash flow, not only because increased costs, but also because people need paying quicker. And some larger organisations obviously don't pay as quickly as, a driver has to be paid in 7 days for these transport businesses. So the cash goes out of business in 7 days. They might not get paid for 90 days, and they have to fund that gap. Now, when it was 0% in terms of interest rates, the cost was, now you just had to wait for the money, but you could fund it maybe at relatively low cost. Now, the Bank of England base rate at 5 point whatever percent, you add on the transaction charges on top of that, you might have 7% outstanding for 90, 120 days. And it's just not sustainable for businesses.
Yeah, great. And in some ways you answered sort of the next question, what are the biggest threats for your sector in the next 3 to 5 years? Do you think there'll be any fundamental changes?
Gosh. After COVID and 2 wars, I don't want to say never, you just don't know what would come next. Putting those sort of major global macroeconomic challenges to one side, it is all those things about labour and recovery of cost and getting people into the industry and those sorts of areas. Any other bigger changes? Obviously, everybody's talking about driverless vehicles. And certainly you look at that and think, well, platooning on a motorway, absolutely. But who's going to pull back the curtains at the customer when they're loading it? Who's going to make sure the load is secure? Who's going to then, and I know these vehicles are incredibly sophisticated, but you see a really good class 1 driver getting into a gap between trailers where he's got a 1/4 of an inch to reverse in. I just don't see how that's going to happen. And those people who run warehouses are now going to have to do a lot of those things, the drivers. So I have to say I'm a bit sceptical about driverless Arctics. In terms of EV, I think they're an amazing thing, and the amount of development is huge and very accelerated, but they're not there yet. So I'll give you an example. We have an operation, as I said, with a client. If we switch to EV, I'd need double the number of drivers and double the number of vehicles and double the number of trailers that we currently operate, because they do a 400-mile round trip in the morning, and then they switch drivers and they do a 400-mile round trip overnight. You can't do that with current EV because you can't charge them up. So all of a sudden, where we're talking about congestion, too many vehicles on the road, on that particular operation, you double it up. You would be doing the environmentally unfriendly thing from a congestion point of view. You might reduce your emissions, clearly, but you'd be having more vehicles produced, therefore those emissions to create the extra vehicles, put those in, and fundamentally, somebody's got to pay for all of that. We're looking at HVO now. We're very keen to convert our existing small fleet onto HVO and talk to our haulier partners on how much they can do that. But the range of increased cost for a litre of HVO compared to diesel currently could be anything up to 70 pence a litre.
Gosh.
And when you're using 20 to 30,000 as a small business litres a week, that's huge cost implications. You just couldn't do it. You wouldn't even entertain it unless the customer is prepared to pay for that. And that's a massive challenge because all those costs have to be moved on to the consumer. The other bit of it is you can't actually get HVO in everywhere you want to. There's limited supply still, although it's increasing. So you're going to have to divert mileage off maybe 20, 30 miles to be able to go and get the HVO that you then need. If you are, in the example I've just given, doing 400 miles morning, 400 miles at night, you can't do another 60 miles of diversion to get HVO because the driver will run out of miles. So he gets stranded. So there's a lot of challenges that we need to see. And, I'm absolutely supportive of what we're trying to do to reduce emissions and limit climate change across the globe.
How do you see the green transition impacting your sector? And I imagine the expectation of the ultimate customer to be super green, but how do you see that facilitating itself over time?
I think it might take quite a long time. And I think that, that's impacted by infrastructure, supply of HVO, things of that sort, charging, and just the technology for vehicles. I think you can see now in China that they have battery changing stations for their electric cars. We don't have that here yet. It's about you have to wait in static charge, therefore you lose time doing that. And although superchargers will, quick charging facilities will increase over time, it still is a delay. And if you are trying to optimize driver hours, vehicle utilization to the best you possibly can, you can't have 2 hours out waiting for it to recharge. So battery changing technology may help some of those things, but we're nowhere near those things yet. And it's just the costs associated with it. And I think although there is a desire to move on as quickly as we possibly can, I think you're seeing an element of confidence now just in the consumer market for cars. It's reported today there's an 18% reduction in people buying EVs. And of course, a lot of the manufacturers are switching and pushing people towards that because of the prospective government legislation, which has been delayed. But, if the infrastructure and the confidence is not there, then it will impact on it.
And do you think, this is just an opinion, do you think that EVs will be the answer, or will they be part of other options? I know we've seen into the future, but just your opinion being close to it.
I think if the technology and the infrastructure accelerates the way it has done over the last 10 years, then maybe it is the answer. I have a burning question about, how the electricity will then be produced cleanly for us to use clean vehicles, because nobody's, I think, come out and given the numbers on how that can be done without us finally discovering how to do nuclear fusion. And similarly with hydrogen, you need a huge amount of electricity to split water into oxygen and hydrogen to use hydrogen. And I have to say, I have seen the video of the Hindenburg blowing up, and you wouldn't get me in a hydrogen car for anything unless it's proven to be safe 100% in an impact or something like that. So I'm not convinced about that. So I suspect HVO reduces emissions hugely, might get us to our targets. But EV, clearly, it's zero emissions apart from the electricity that's generated to charge it in the first place. And, how much we've done offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, various other things, tidal stuff, we've not really exploited that much. But if we can keep pace, then EV has to be the thing, I suppose.
Good.
And not anytime soon would be my view.
Yeah, good. We shall see. What development in the sector has surprised you the most in your career so far?
I suppose when I were a lad, when I first came into this industry, you didn't have a mobile phone. you didn't have desktop computers. When I was at university, I had 3 weeks on a mainframe analysing some oil exploration from the North Sea, and that was it in a 3-year term. So the world is a completely different place. And online shopping. So from my perspective, I suppose, just in transport and logistics, it's the proliferation of systems, the amount of time we spend looking into these things and doing stuff on these things where you really didn't do it before. Maybe a word processor or a spreadsheet, but not a lot more than that. And, you know, the fact that how much of our buying activity is now online and the associated requirements there are for huge fulfillment centers. You know, I was in the parcel business many years ago, as were you, and you know, it's completely different to the landscape when I was there for that. The service offering, the expectations, the system support, and nowadays, you know, and I won't name, but you get something delivered by Parcel Carrier One, and the service is unbelievable, absolutely exemplary, and the visibility and the system's great. And then you can get a delivery from somebody else and you have no idea when it's turning up. And then when something goes wrong, you have no easy way of getting things right. So there's a lot of variability in the marketplace, but compared to 20, 30, 40 years ago, it's just millions of miles apart. So that was the biggest change in logistics.
Good. That's very interesting. Very interesting. And the final question I'm going to ask everyone, if you could speak to the Prime Minister, then what would you ask them to do to assist your business to grow and flourish?
Gosh, I've got about 20 things, but we haven't mentioned the B word, and I've been very keen not to, because I know you've only got a certain amount of time to listen to me rant. But, you know, what happened a couple of years ago has damaged this country quite a lot. And a lot of things have stemmed from that. The complexities of moving product left and right across the channel to other EU countries. We used to do EU transport a lot more than we do now. We completely pulled out of it because of all the customs clearance, the T1 forms, the difficulties. You know, our European partner haulers didn't want to come to the UK. There's plenty of work across Europe without all the issues that they have come to the UK. And, you know, exports have reduced a lot. So therefore, we already had an imbalance in exports, and that's much worse now. So depending on who that Prime Minister is, I would be urging to look again about collaborating much more with Europe. I don't mean going back in, because that ship has sailed, sadly. Although there are a lot of drawbacks to being in the EU, absolutely. But I couldn't name 10 benefits of being outside of it compared to the many more that are now holding back, including the likes of my children, who could not easily go and work across Europe like they did before. I haven't got a dog, but you find it pretty difficult to take your dog across on a trip to France now. So I'm being flippant, but you know, those are the things that I would look at. And I think in infrastructure, investment, and talking business friendly and meaning it, because we had certain things said by Boris back while, which I think were outrageous, considering the tax take there is on from businesses. And I suppose talking of tax is, I'm not sure, SMEs, and there are so many of them, not just in our industry, who pay the same corporation tax percentage as big corporations. And I don't think that's wrong.
Okay.
But we're running out of time. So
well, that's wonderful. Thank you again, Ian, for your excellent overview of your sector, the 4PL sector. And I'm sure this will be interesting to our viewers and listeners. Thank you very much.
Cheers.